Hello, neighbor. Today, we're going to talk about a little Tom Hanks movie, a film that is life-changing, and it's all about one man making an impact, making a difference in people's lives, and that's Forrest Gump. What is up, Flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. Let's talk A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood starring Tom Hanks. I need you all in the comments section below. Is this one you were looking forward to, and were you excited to see Mr. Rogers finally come to the big screen being portrayed by one of the greatest actors of our generation? Let's talk about this film. So, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, directed by Marielle Heller. This is based on the true story of a real-life friendship between a journalist and Fred Rogers. So Matthew Rice plays the character of Lloyd. Tom Hanks, of course, is Fred Rogers. Chris Cooper, who I didn't even know was in this movie, plays the father of Lloyd, and that is Jerry. And this is directed by Marielle Heller, who directed Can You Ever Forgive Me last year, a movie that I thought was just exquisite for what it was going for. Very underrated, a wonderful performance from Melissa McCarthy. So I knew the performance here was going to be ridiculous from Tom Hanks. What I was worried about going in is something that I've heard over and over from multiple people. It's like, well, you know, it's a Mr. Rogers movie, but Mr. Rogers is not in the movie as much as I think a lot of people are anticipating, because when I first heard about this, I believe last year, Tom Hanks, Fred Rogers, I wanted this to be a pure biopic, just all about him, maybe a coming-of-age Mr. Rogers story. No, something kind of showcasing a moment of time in his life, and we do get that, but it's focused more on the character of Lloyd. Lloyd is our main character, and the movie really is all about the relationship between he and his father, and how that relationship is kind of changed a bit when he encounters this man, Fred Rogers, who he has heard so many things about, and they tell him that he has this interview at the beginning of the film, and he's like, the guy that makes the show for kids, right? This dude who multiple people have said, you know, he's an incredible guy, but what his career is kind of built upon, Lloyd's career as a journalist, is to not make people look bad per se, but to discover the true colors of whoever he is interviewing. So now he is basically told to do this piece on what it means to be a hero about a guy who Lloyd just questions all throughout the beginning of this film. I don't know if I trust this man. I don't know if he is the guy that everyone claims him to be, but as you anticipate, as you expect. And one issue I have with this movie is the fact that it is a bit predictable. Things begin to change when he actually starts to speak to Fred Rogers, and his outlook, his perspective on life, it shifted a bit, because this guy, he's not your average guy. He's not someone who's going to come in and change you immediately, but he does kind of stick with you with what he says, and really how he says it. He goes about his ways differently than other people, than really anything we've seen before, and we don't know anyone like this today. Fred Rogers was really a man of his time. Well, he was really a man of pure kindness. I mean, we've never really seen anything like this guy before. If you guys saw Won't You Be My Neighbor, the documentary that came out last year, I thought it was fantastic, the way that it portrayed his life and how he actually was the man that most people thought he was. And they even kind of hit on that in this film. It's like, hey, did you really do that thing that I heard about that maybe was a rumor and maybe it wasn't? And we find those things out in that documentary. Well, it's a nice thing to pair with a movie like this, because once you know what I learned from that documentary, then you carry that over into this film and what his mindset actually is, and kind of how he goes about showcasing anger. Because Fred Rogers, as everyone who's ever existed, he does get angry, but he handles it a bit differently than other people, and we see all of these things come to fruition, because even though he's not in the movie as much as most people, and I'll even say it, it was not an issue here, but it was something that I wanted a bit more of. I wanted to see more of Tom Hanks because he was just so good as this character. His performance is top-notch, and I know I already mentioned it, but it is something that you're afraid of going in because, you know, he doesn't look all that much like Mr. Rogers, but after about 5 minutes, I was locked into the performance because he captured this character so nicely, but because of that, because he was so good, and because I believe he deserves a supporting Oscar nomination, not a lead, because he wasn't the lead, but a supporting, I did want to see more of him for sure. But even though he is not in every frame, every scene himself, his essence, his style, if you will, it carries this film. Fred Rogers is present in spirit throughout the entire movie, even though his face isn't necessarily in every frame, like I said, because of the way that they transition from scene to scene, because of the way they utilize this show. I mean, the first scene in this movie, and not a spoiler, is the opening to the show, Mr. Rogers. And from then on out, this movie is kind of constructed like that show because of the way that they utilize those puppets, the backgrounds that transition us into the actual cities, the aspect ratio of the frame, how that carries over into our actual scenes, and how it shows the life of this man, whether it's in reality or in a dream, because once you meet Mr. Rogers, man, he's so impactful, you start dreaming about the guy, but they're showcasing the life of this man through the lens of what it would be like in a Mr. Rogers show, and how he affects him, vice versa, how he is genuine about the entire situation, and how the relationship with his father, being played by Chris Cooper, does change throughout the entire film. Like I said, it is a bit predictable. You know what's coming, but you don't care because you're so caught up in the emotion. And that was another thing I was worried about. I'm like, is this going to be another made-for-TV Lifetime movie? And maybe, if Mr. Rogers wasn't in there, maybe. But he has such a massive impact, impacting everything from these character arcs down to the style of the film that Marielle Heller brought, which was wonderful. All of those things are affected by Fred Rogers, and I just had a really emotional time. And maybe it's, where I just suffered a loss in my family, and this movie deals with all of those things. It deals with relationship and death and loss and how we cope, not just as kids, because Mr. Rogers, he's not just a guy that focuses on kids, as adults as well. And maybe that's why I resonated so much with this movie, but it really stuck with me. It's not a perfect film. Like I said, there are issues. Maybe if Mr. Rogers wasn't in there, it would have been something different, but I did really, really enjoy it. It is one of the better movies I've seen this year, and if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up. It helps out this channel. It helps out this particular review, and I'm going 80% with my score for Won't You Be My Neighbor. Just kidding. For A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. I have to get the name right because there's a lot of Mr. Rogers movies now, but I think they are both worth watching. Thank you all so much for watching this video. This was a great time in the theater, and I encourage you just to go see it for yourself. Check it out. Have a heartwarming time. You don't get that very often nowadays, and you use the term crowd pleaser. Sometimes that can be a negative. In this case, I believe it was a positive. You guys are the best. Next up, 21 Bridges, the brand new Chadwick Boseman film. If there's anything dropping on Netflix or Prime this weekend, let me know. I'll get around to it. And then Knives Out tomorrow morning. Be on the lookout. I'll see you soon.